Good morning, children. Today, let us begin with the third chapter of your history textbook, Standard 7th, the Delhi Sultans. Children, in this video, we will learn about major 4 points, that is Delhi, the rise in importance, why Delhi became so important. Then we are going to learn about the Sultanate dynasties and their rulers. Then we are going to learn about the sources, how did we come to know about the Delhi Sultans. Then the background and the mindset of the Delhi Sultans during that period. So you see, children, in our previous video we had learned about the importance of the Chola kingdom, which was dominating in down south, but there was no mention of Delhi at that time. Now Delhi became an important city during the 12th century. It rose in importance. So you can see Delhi, it's right in the heart of our country. The founders of Delhi were actually the Rajput kings. In fact, it was the Tomar dynasty that first made Delhi as their capital city. Now, one of the most important king of the Tomar dynasty was King Angapal. During his time, Delhi grew into importance and became an important commercial center. During the middle of the 12th century, another Rajput dynasty called the Chauhans, they are also called as Chamanas, defeated the Tomar dynasty and declared Delhi as their capital city. Although the Chauhans were ruling from Ajmer, but after defeating the Tomar dynasty, they made Delhi as their capital city. And one of the most important king of the Chauhans was Prithviraj Chauhan, and he is said to be the last Hindu king of India. Now, under the Tomars and the Chauhans, Delhi became a very important commercial center. Many rich Jain merchants started living in the city, they started trading, and Delhi became a very prosperous and a flourishing trade center. Now these rich Jain merchants who came and lived in the city of Delhi, they also constructed several beautiful temples in and around Delhi. And with the construction of temples, the importance of Delhi grew further. Now coins also were minted in Delhi. What is minting? Minting means making of coins, and these coins are given the name as Delhi Wal since it was made in Delhi. And with the minting of coins, Delhi became a very, very important commercial center. Now children, the transformation of Delhi into a capital city that controlled vast areas of the subcontinent started with the foundation of the Delhi Sultanate rule, which began in the 13th century. Now these Delhi Sultanate rulers really transformed Delhi. They also built new cities in and around Delhi. You can see it was Jahanpana, Tughlakabad, Adilabad, Siri, Haus Khas, Sultani. These were some of the new cities which they built in and around Delhi, and that is why Delhi, a total transformation of Delhi took place and it became more and more important. Now children, if you remember, I had mentioned in the video which I did for the second chapter that there were two major invasions from Afghanistan in India. They had heard about the wealth and riches of India, and one of them was Mahmud Ghazni, whose main intention was to loot and plunder, especially attack the temples because they were storehouse of wealth, take that wealth from India and use it to beautify his own city in Afghanistan called Ghazni. Another invader who came, who had also heard about the wealth and riches of India, was Muhammad Ghori. Now his intention was to loot and plunder India, but also to establish an empire in India. Now Muhammad Ghori, he came, looted and plundered India and captured a number of territories in India, but he didn't stay back to rule the country. In fact, he left his slave behind, who was a very trusted servant of Muhammad Ghori called Qutubuddin Aibak, and he asked him to rule India and establish an empire in India, and that with Qutubuddin Aibak started the Delhi Sultanate rule in India. So children, in this map you can see the extent of the Delhi Sultanate rule. It controlled vast areas and Delhi was the capital of all these rulers which ruled from Delhi. There were major 5 dynasties which we are going to learn now. Now children, there were basically 5 dynasties which together made up the Delhi Sultanate rule. Okay, the first one we can see here, it is called the Mamluk dynasty, which is also called as the slave dynasty. Then we have the Khilji dynasty, then the Tughlaq dynasty, Sayyid dynasty and the Lodi dynasty. So initially Delhi became the capital and gains its importance during the Rajput rule, that is for the Tomar Rajputs and then the Chauhans, and from there onwards it started the Delhi Sultanate rule, and these were the 5 major dynasties. Okay. So you see, these entire Delhi Sultanate, these rulers called themselves as sultans, because in Persian the meaning of sultan is king. They preferred to call themselves as sultan rather than kings. Okay, so that is why this, the country or the region where they ruled became to be known as the Sultanate, and they all made Delhi as their capital. So that is why it is called as Delhi Sultanate. So children, here is a chart which is there also in your textbook, and we can see the most important rulers who were ruling from Delhi. Delhi was actually founded by the Tomara Rajputs, okay, and the most important king was Angapala, and in the middle of the 12th century it was then ruled by the Chauhans, who were basically from Ajmer but now made Delhi as their capital, and the most important king was Prithviraj Chauhan. Now if you remember clearly, in my previous videos I had mentioned that Prithviraj Chauhan fought 2 battles with Muhammad Ghori. Now in the first battle of Terrain he defeated Muhammad Ghori and sent him back to Afghanistan, but Muhammad Ghori was very adamant in order to loot and plunder and capture territories in India, so he came back with great force and defeated Prithviraj Chauhan in the second battle of Terrain in 1192. But in that battle all the Prithviraj Chauhan lost the battle, but Muhammad Ghori died and he handed over the reins to Qutbuddin Aibak, who was his slave. Okay, so then starts the Delhi Sultanate rule in India from Qutbuddin Aibak. Now Rajput dynasty doesn't come under Delhi Sultanate. Please remember this, children. Okay. So children, from Qutbuddin Aibak starts the Delhi Sultanate rule in India, and these were the early Turkish rulers: Qutbuddin Aibak, Shamsuddin Iltutmish, Razia and Ghiyasuddin Balban. They were also called as the Mamluk dynasty or the slave dynasty. Now why were they called as slave dynasty? Because Qutbuddin Aibak actually was a slave of Muhammad Ghori. Qutbuddin didn't hand over the territories to his son. Actually normally the Sultan hands it over to his son, but Qutbuddin was a slave, and when Qutbuddin died he handed over to his slave, who was called as Iltutmish. After Iltutmish he found his daughter, who was very capable of handling the entire empire, so he handed over the reins to Razia Sultan, but Razia Sultan was not accepted by the people during that time, and then it went to the next slave, who was called as Ghiyasuddin Balban. So all these were actually slaves, and that is the reason they are called as slave dynasty or Mamluk dynasty. After the slave dynasty, the next dynasty came up, which was the Khilji dynasty, and the most important king was Alauddin Khilji. Then it went over to Tughlaq dynasty. Most important king was Muhammad Tughlaq. From the Tughlaq it went to the Sayyid dynasty, and then finally to the Lodi dynasty, after which, after the Lodi dynasty, we see the coming of the Mughals. So children, you see the Delhi Sultanate rule started with the Mamluk dynasty or slave dynasty, starting from 1211 to 1290, and this is the extent of the empire. Okay, the founder was Qutbuddin Aibak, then it went over to Iltutmish, then Razia Sultan, and then Ghiyasuddin Balban, and they were all slaves. That is why it is called the slave dynasty or Mamluk dynasty, except for Razia, who was the daughter of Iltutmish. Okay. So children, after the Mamluk dynasty or slave dynasty, then it went over to the Khilji dynasty. The most important king was Alauddin Khilji, and the Khilji dynasty ruled from 1290 to 1320, and you can now see the extent of the empire. It's growing and growing. Okay. Now children, after the Khilji dynasty, it was now the Tughlaq dynasty. You can see the extent of empire, discovering almost whole of India, and they ruled from 1320 to 1398. And the most important king, Sultans, sorry, they are not called as kings, they are called themselves as Sultan, because in Persian, in the name of king is called as Sultan. So it is Muhammad bin Tughlaq and Firoz Shah Tughlaq. After Firoz Shah Tughlaq, all the successors were very weak and they could not avoid the Mongol invasions. One of the Mongol generals, called Timur, he is also called as Timur Lane. He had heard about the riches and wealth of India and wanted to attack Delhi and loot and plunder and take away all the wealth. Now he entered via Punjab. There he defeated the Sikhs and the Ohams and entered New Delhi. It is said that he made havoc in Delhi. There is loot, plunder, rape, murder, and he looted all the wealth, and while going back he destroyed everything on his way back. But he left behind his general called Kiriz Khan, from where started the Sayyid dynasty. Children, now you must be wondering why the rulers from Iran, Afghanistan and Mongols now wanted to make Delhi as a capital city and rule from Delhi. There were mainly two reasons. One, that Delhi was very close from all these countries, so the best place was to occupy Delhi, and from Delhi there were various trading routes also. So Delhi was well connected with other parts of India and trading could be done easily. So all of them eyed Delhi and they wondered that if they can control Delhi, they will be able to control the whole of India. Now after Timur plundered and took away the riches from Delhi and went away, he left behind his governor called Kiriz Khan, and from him started the Sayyid dynasty, which ruled from 1414 to 1451. After the Sayyid dynasty came the Lodi dynasty, and the last of the Lodi dynasty, the king was Ibrahim Lodi, and the Lodi dynasty ruled from 1451 to 1526. Now with the end of the Ibrahim Lodi, we see how Babur defeated Ibrahim Lodi in the first battle of Panipat, and from there started the Mughal rule. Children, now let's look into how do we know about so much in detail about these Delhi Sultanate rulers. What were the main sources that we came to know about these Delhi Sultanate rulers? Now historians, when they write history, they study the coins, inscriptions and architecture. These are the traditional sources, but the most important source that we come to know about the Delhi Sultanate rulers is, so we come to know about the Delhi Sultanate rulers by the Tawarik. Okay, now what is Tawarik? They are histories which are written down in Persian by learned men. So children, what are Tawariks? They are the most valuable sources for learning about the Delhi Sultanate rule. Tariq is a singular form when we learn about one history, and where there are more writings we call it as Tawarik. They are histories written in Persian. Why did they write in Persian? Because Persian was the language which was used for administration by the Delhi Sultanate rulers. So children, now the question arises as to who were the authors of the Tawariks. Yes, who were these authors? They were learned men. They were secretaries, administrators, poets, courtiers. And what did they write in these Tawariks? Okay, they wrote about all the events that took place during each rule of the Delhi Sultanate. And they also advised the rulers, the sultans, on how to govern. And they laid more stress on a just and a fair rule. Now there was a Persian author in the 13th century called Farrakh-e-Mudabir. He wrote about the circle of justice, and this is an excerpt that is taken from your book. Let us understand what was the circle of justice. Now children, let us understand what was the circle of justice. So you can see here I have drawn a balance. This is justice. How will we get honest and true justice? So firstly, the king cannot live without his soldiers. He cannot survive. A king, if he has to rule, he must have soldiers. And then to keep the soldiers properly, the soldiers need to get salary. Otherwise, they will not protect the king. Proper salaries have to be given. And how will the salaries be paid? Only when we collect revenue from the farmers, isn't it? Where will the salary, how will the king pay salaries to the soldiers? Yes, when taxes are collected, revenue is collected from the farmers. And why will the farmers give taxes? And when will they give the taxes? Yes, they will give taxes when they are happy and they are doing well, their crops are growing properly, and then they are able to get money. Then they will be happily paying the taxes to the king. Now, so when the farmers are happy, then what happens? This promotes justice and honest governance. Only then the king can rule properly in a just and a fair manner. So this was called as a circle of justice, and this is what was written in by the Tawariks, advising the king that you must promote the circle of justice. Now these Tawariks were handwritten, and that is why they are called as manuscripts. Now let us see how they prepared the manuscript. There were 4 stages in the preparing of the manuscript. If you can see the first figure A, yes, you can see this man preparing the paper, making the paper. After the paper is prepared, what is this one doing? He's writing the text, okay? And then after writing the text, this you can see here, he is melting gold, and all the important words are highlighted. Like we use a highlighter pen to highlight the important words. They are melting gold, and then with that gold they would use it to highlight the important words in the manuscript. And then in the last picture you can see he is binding the books together, and these are the 4 stages in the preparing of the manuscript. Now let us understand what was the background and the mindset of these people who wrote the histories about the Delhi Sultanate rulers. Now children, since the Tawariks are the main source of history of the Delhi Sultan, we must understand history in its correct light. We must understand it properly, and we must understand the background and the mindset of the Tawarik authors. We must be sure that they are not biased while they are writing about the Delhi Sultanate rulers. Biased means they are only writing good things about the kings and not telling us about the weaknesses of the king. So they are only writing in one particular direction, either praises or either they are criticizing. So in order to find out that, we must understand from the background and what was their thinking, so that we can properly construct the history of the Delhi Sultanate. Now we must understand 3 important details about the Tawariks, okay, about their background and mindset. Now the authors of the Tawarik, they all lived in cities, mostly in Delhi, and they did not live in villages. So when they wrote the histories about the Delhi Sultanate, what happened? They only wrote about the people in the cities. So they had only one kind of picture of the people. So they did not know how the people in the villages lived. So we have to look into this when we are learning about Delhi Sultanate rulers. And then most of them wrote their histories for sultans in order to impress them and get rich rewards. A lot of money they wanted. Therefore, we can say that Tawarik can be biased. Real events may have been modified in history to please the sultans. So most of them may not be true. What they have written may not be true. They are just exaggerated just to impress the sultans and get more money from them. A third thing that we must know, they all advise the rulers to preserve the social order, how our society should be, and it should be based on birthright and gender distinction. So let us understand what is birthright and gender distinction. Now these Tawariks believed in birthright. They said once the king, if the king is there, and after his death the kingdom should be passed to his son and not to somebody else on the basis of his merit. Just because he's good, it should be passed to the son only, and the social order should be maintained. So people, if you're born in a certain kind of a family, you should remain there, okay, and not give it to somebody else who may be better, but the entire ruling class should be the noble family. Now, and what was gender distinction? That they made a distinction between men and women, and they said that women were inferior, they were less capable than men, so they should be kept below. So a woman cannot become the sultan or a king because she is inferior and less capable. So that's what they promoted, the Tawariks. They promoted birthright and gender distinction while they wrote histories about Delhi Sultanate. There are examples given in your textbook about this kind of a mindset on gender distinction and birthright. You can see here one was Mina J. Siraj. What did he write? He said Sultan Iltutmish handed over the entire kingdom to his daughter. Okay, and she's a woman. So everyone knew, even Minhaj Siraj realized that she was more capable and able than all her brothers. But people there around were not comfortable to see as a woman, as a queen, as a ruler. So nobles were not happy, and finally she was removed in 1240. And he again further goes to write that the social order has been created by God, and in which women are supposed to be inferior to men, so they cannot become kings because this is created by God. Okay, even though she may have excellent qualities, she cannot become the ruler. So these were the mindsets during time, and you can see even Minhaj Siraj has written about it. Now, this kind of a mindset was not only prevalent with the Delhi Sultanate rule. We see this kind of a mindset in other areas also. There was another queen called Rudrama Devi. She was from the Kakatiya dynasty in Warangal, parts of modern Andhra Pradesh, and she ruled from 1262 to 1289. Now, when she was ruling, she was a lady. She had to change her name on the inscription, and she pretended that she was a man. So you can see the similar mindset like the Delhi Sultanate ruler, where women were considered inferior to men. Then we see a different mindset other than the Delhi Sultanate. There was a queen called Didda. She was ruling from Kashmir. She ruled from 980 to 1003, and her title Didda, which comes from the word Didi. Didi means elder sister, and she was affectionately called by her subject as Didi. So they accepted the lady as their ruler. Okay, so we see a different mindset here. Now this is all for this part of the video. We'll continue with the chapter in my next video. So this is the part 1 of the Delhi Sultanate rule, and we'll continue in my next video, which will be coming soon. Thank you. Please do view and subscribe.